All right, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, for those of you who don't know, essentially I do these videos every semester for the exams where it's applicable, where I'll read through my notes just so that everybody who's working or doesn't necessarily have time to read through all of theirs diligently and are preoccupied with day-to-day tasks have the opportunity to, if they can wear headphones, listen to my notes. So as for the people that have never experienced this before, if you have, welcome back. I'm probably going to be doing these for most of the exams that we have during the semester. We'll see. Now that I'm actually doing my due diligence and partaking in textbook note-taking, what I'm going to do is, specifically because of the nature of our Revel psychology book, I'm going to be using the class PowerPoint as kind of like a summarization, more of like an intro to the concepts that we'll elaborate on in the textbook. So I'm not going to do like concept into textbook concept and then slideshow concept into textbook. It's mostly just going to be, I'm going to run through the full the slideshow concepts, and then I'll make it known that I've finished that. And then I'll go over the textbook concepts, and if you'd like to stay, you can, just to get the full experience or the full scope of the knowledge. So anyway, this is chapter 1 to social psychology. Topic 1 to social psychology, the introduction to social psychology, okay? So, what is social psychology? Social psychology is the scientific study of how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all influenced by the actual, imagined, or implied presence of other people. For example, if you're alone, even though there's nobody around you, you might dress a certain way because you imagine what other people would think, right? Again, that's how other people's thoughts, feelings, whatever it may be, how your thoughts, feelings, whatever it may be, are influenced by the imagined or actual existence of others. So, what's the focus of the field? The focus is to ask why and how human behavior is shaped by our social environment. Unlike personality psychology, for example, which we'll get into, social psychologists are a lot less interested in isolated individual traits and more so in the interaction between the person and the social context that they're partaking in whatever facet we're examining. So let's look at a key concept here. We're gonna be talking about this again, but construals. What are construals in social psychology? So construals, construals, depending on what you say. It's essentially just a construct. It's a key concept. The idea of the concept, it's not the objective reality that matters most, but how individuals interpret or construe their social world. So essentially that is the concept, and what actually is the construal. The construal are just subjective interpretations of social phenomena. So we'll repeat that. The key concept behind construals, which are subjective interpretations of social phenomena, is that it's not just the objective reality that counts, but it's how individuals interpret or construe their social world. So, for example, two people may seem to have the same facial expression, one interpreted as anger, though, and another as concentration. So again, for whatever reason, these two things that seem similar externally, internally, are different. So even if objectively they look like the same expression, subjectively, internally, they aren't conveying the same one. Another key concept we'll be looking at is scientific orientation. Just in the context of social psychology, the scientific orientation of social psychology is all based around experiments. We'll be getting into a ton of those. Unlike philosophy, for example, or speculation-based fields, when it comes to social psychology, it relies more on controlled, systematic collection of data through the scientific method. We've talked about the scientific method a lot. It's the whole theory, hypothesis, into research method, find your data, etc., etc. So that's our quick overview. What is social psychology? Again, scientific study of people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and how those are influenced by the actual, imagined, or implied presence of other people. The focus is the how and why of how human behavior is shaped by our social environment. A key concept is construals, which are essentially personal constructs, or the subjective interpretation of social phenomena in the world. And the orientation of social psychology is experimental. So, let's look at this. Social psychology as a science and common sense as part of that. So, Essentially, what we're looking at in this general overview of the chapter is the kind of like the overlaps and the different contrasts that social psychology has. So, in this point 2, if you're looking at the video, we have point 2, which is social psychology, science, and common sense. And then we have point 3, which is comparing social psychology to other fields. So we'll kind of go through this together. So essentially, social psychology overlaps with a bunch of different fields in a lot of different ways. But really, we can narrow it down to being its own thing through examining these contrasting relationships, right? So when it comes to philosophy, for example, both disciplines can ask deep questions about human nature, morality, and behavior, but social psychology applies controlled experimentation to test our assumptions. Philosophy does not do that, right? It's more about common sense. It's more about opinion as opposed to fact, as about data. So again, when it comes to philosophy, they're both deep question, human nature, morality, and behavior-based disciplines, but social psychology applies controlled experiments to test assumptions, where philosophy does not. In the textbook, which we'll look at, we talk about this idea of like folk psychology, where again we kind of have these folktale-esque ideas of how things work, right? All based on common sense, right? Opposites attract. That's one, right? It's kind of like a saying, it's a figure of speech. This is considered folk psychology, but the issue is that you compare that with birds of a feather flock together. These are completely oppositional, juxtaposed sayings that are both considered to be fact, technically under the folk psychology lens. And that's where we need social psychology, right? Social psychology would seek evidence-based testable conclusions into seeing which one of these is truly accurate. When it comes to the other fields, right, when it comes to sociology, both of them focus on situational and societal influences, without a doubt. But the difference is how they analyze. So when it comes to sociology, sociology studies broad structural forces, right? Institutions, class structure, culture. Social psychology, on the other hand, it focuses on the individual within that situation, right? Social psychology is identifying universal properties of human nature that cut across culture and class. It's really more about the individual and their experiencing of the environment as opposed to the environment and its effect on the individual, right? There's this overplay between both, right? Again, because we have that similarity, it's a focus on situational and societal factors that are influencing people. But again, sociology is more broad, structural, while social psychology is more the individual. So again, we have a comparison with philosophy, right? Being more data-driven instead of opinion-driven or common sense-driven. Sociology, right? Sociology is more broad, more structural, while social psychology is more about the individual. And then we have our last comparator, personality psychology. They both study individuals and their behavior. Naturally, it's a field in psychology, but while personality psychology emphasizes internal individual differences, right? Traits, personality traits, which we looked at in our earlier class. I think it was 201, Psych 201 is when we looked at that. Social psychology, on the other hand, emphasizes shared psychological processes that make people susceptible to social influence. And we'll look at that specifically in this chapter coming up, and we'll look at the power of the situation. But for example, where a personality psychologist might study why one person is naturally extroverted, a social psychologist may study why everyone talks more at a party than in a classroom. So we have this kind of experimental lens that lets us dive into an individual and their behavior, but we're not looking at differential traits that decide on that behavior. We're looking at the shared processes that make people susceptible to the behaviors that would lead them to acting in a certain way, right? Again, the fundamental difference is, while personality psychology emphasizes stable internal individual differences, social psychology emphasizes shared psychological processes that make people susceptible to social influence. So those are our comparators. Moving on, let's look at the power of the situation. So we've talked about this in class a lot at this point, but primarily we're going to look a lot at the fundamental attribution error that's mentioned here. I think it's mentioned in chapter 3, I want to say. Yeah, I think it's mentioned again in chapter 3. It's mentioned in chapter 4. It's fundamental. So the power of the situation. Again, the key principle here, not again, didn't mention it. The key principle here is that social environment strongly shapes human behavior. We've talked about this. Again, what are we looking at? The difference between social psychology and personality psychology. It's the difference between individual traits versus the psychological process that make people susceptible to social influences. So We're looking at the power of the situation now. The key principle is the social environment, the social influences that strongly shape human behavior. That is key to social psychology. The error that we make, and this ties directly into the fundamental attribution error, which we'll talk about in a sec, is that we fundamentally underestimate situational power, and instead we overemphasize dispositional factors or personality traits. So we focus on the internal as opposed to the external. That is the fundamental attribution error. It's the tendency to overestimate internal or dispositional causes of behavior and underestimate situational or external influences. So for example, someone cuts us off in traffic, we think this person is an asshole, dispositionally, rather than, maybe they're driving their pregnant wife to the hospital, maybe they're rushing because they have work, whatever it may be, right? That would be situational, and it would lead to a more empathetic point of view. So, we have a bunch of these different establishing concepts. Let's look at a case study that kind of dives into all of these rolled into one. So, this is the Lieberman, Samuels, and Ross case study, or the community game study. We've talked about it in class. In case you missed it, didn't read it, or haven't reviewed it, this is it. So, the goal of the study is to test how labels, specifically in this case game labels, and expectations of the game can influence cooperative versus competitive behavior in a person's game that they're playing. Right, so essentially, here's the rundown. We might elaborate on this in the textbook section, but I'm just going to do it now anyway, and then I might still do it later. Anyway, the scope of the study is, as far as I remember, again, these researchers were looking at the effect of situational influence, in this case, labeling influence, and how that can influence cooperative versus competitive play. So they had, I think, residence coordinators at a university select groups of people. One group that they know to be more competitive individuals, right, like your business majors, even maybe your law and society, political science majors, and your more cooperative people, right, like your education majors, even maybe your psych majors, whatever it may be, your arts students, whatever. So they brought these people together, and they is the mic working? Oh, my bad. Okay, sorry. Yeah, uh, ridiculous. Yeah, so they brought people together, and as far as I can remember, they had them play this game. They knew that they were going to be playing a game. They didn't know. I don't think actually. Yeah, they knew how they were divided. But so they had some people playing the game in some groups, and some people playing the game in other groups. And they wanted to see how cooperatively or competitively people would play. So what did they do? They told them you can either play competitively, and I think one of you can get the money or the prize or whatever win, or you can play cooperatively, and the other person and you can both win the prize, get the money, whatever it may be. So they told them how they can play. They gave them their options, and they had some people's groups play the game. They were both playing the same game, but they had one group of people play the game and they called it the community game, and they had another group of people play the game and they called it the Wall Street game. And what they found is that regardless of the major that you were in, this apparent dispositional factor that we would think would influence how we play had no effect. Instead, the labeling of the game, that situational factor, had all of the influence when it came to how people played. When people were playing the community game, quote unquote, regardless of if you were a cooperative person or a competitive person, most people played cooperatively. Upwards of 60 to 70% played cooperatively. But even when we played the Wall Street game then, it turned out to be the case that even though there was a difference in the dispositional factors, again, some people were cooperative, some people were competitive, they both played with lacking cooperation. So, what can we conclude? We can conclude that social context exerted stronger influence than personality. So again, the study dramatically illustrates the power of situational labels over supposedly stable personality traits. Yeah. Just give me 30 seconds. I don't know what happened with the mic there. I'm gonna test. Give me just 1 second. Skip 30 seconds ahead if you're watching. Okay. Sorry, I guess now we'd have like 10 seconds before the people who skipped got here, so I just have a little pad at the top of my laptop where I can mute and unmute. It was bugging out. Anywho, back to construals. So, again, for the 30-second recap, we just finished talking about the community game. Now time for construals. Just for the record, I don't know if we need to know this, but the community game, again, Lieberman, Samuels, and Ross, 2004. That case study. So, where do construals come from, right? These basic human motives that provide for us. Personal constructs, or construals, again, like we said, the ways that we internalize the external into subjective interpretation. This usually differs based on situation. This fundamental idea of a construal. It's done through two fundamental motives. And these are going to be crucial to the rest of the course. I think we've already reviewed one of them in topic 4, chapter 4. But not to get away from myself, again, construals, where do they come from? They come from two fundamental motives. One is the need to be accurate, and the other is the need to feel good about ourselves, or self-esteem. So, when it comes to accuracy, again, naturally, we want to understand the world around us. We want to be accurate, we want to be right. However, accuracy can sometimes compromise biases, needs, or even provide us with a moment of embarrassment. So we also have this need to feel good about ourselves. Again, as we all know, when it comes to ego, that means that people are motivated to maintain a positive self-view, which is not a bad thing. But sometimes it can override accuracy. For example, after failing an exam, a student might blame the test format rather than their own preparation to protect self-esteem. We'll often sacrifice the need to be accurate to protect our self-esteem. Not necessarily a good thing, but it's the fastest way to act, and we'll get into this more when it comes to heuristics and controlled versus autonomic thinking, but that's a later conversation. Again, all you need to know, where do construals come from? They come from the basic human motive of two fundamental components: the need to be accurate and the need to feel good about ourselves, or to have high self-esteem. Guard our self-esteem. So, a couple more concepts here before we move on to the textbook. Self-justification. So, self-justification is important to the way that we build the world around us. So, self-justification, definitionally, in this case psychologically, is the process by which people distort reality to maintain a positive self-image. So, this plays directly into our second motivation for construal formation. So yeah, usually we'll distort the reality of past events that can make us unhappy, upset, or ashamed, for example. Like it will revise memories of shameful past actions so that they seem less bad. We'll justify painful experiences. This is something that we're going to get into more. But essentially, there are cases where we will, in addition to revising memories of shameful past actions so that they seem less bad, we will justify painful experiences that we go through. For example, enduring a difficult initiation for a group can increase the perceived value of the group. For example, we'll look back at the past and we'll think, if I suffered to join this frat, it must be worthwhile. It has to be. I suffered to do it, and I wouldn't just put myself through that suffering for nothing. So we will rewrite that past for ourselves. This principle reflects cognitive dissonance reduction. It's a concept that's mentioned in the textbook. I don't know if we mention it in the slides, but it essentially just means altering our attitudes to match behavior. So for example, if we join a sports team and we get hazed, we might justify going through that by convincing ourselves that the sports team is great, and we think that it's so much fun because we went through that difficult thing. Again, cognitive dissonance reduction. It's crucial to the whole justifying painful experiences part of the two-step self-justification model, which involves revising memories of shameful past experiences so that they seem less bad, and justifying painful experiences, etc., etc. Yeah, so essentially, we distort the past to make ourselves feel better. Yeah. Applying social psychology to social problems. Social psychology is not just a theory, it has many real world applications and problems that it addresses. It can reduce prejudice by finding ways to reduce hostility between groups, media violence, right? It can study the effects of violent television on aggression, health promotions, all of these things. So, to summarize, before we get into the textbook, social psychology studies individuals in context, emphasizing constructs and the power of situations. It differs from sociology, which has a societal focus, and personality psychology, which has a focus on traits. Its key insights involve the fundamental attribution error, basic human motives, right, accuracy versus self-esteem, and the tendency towards self-justification. The case study we looked at by Lieberman and everybody else showed that labels and context through that situational factor outweighs dispositional or personality in shaping behavior. And ultimately, social psychology applies scientific methods to real-world problems like prejudice, violence, and health to make a difference. So, I'm going to go grab some water. I'll be back pretty soon. If you don't want to listen to the expanded version of all of that, great. You're free to leave and move on to the next video. If not, we're 20 minutes in. We're about to focus on the textbook, which will be many times longer than this was. So, do yourself a service if you'd like, and move on. If not, feel free to stay for the rest of the video. I'll be back in a second. Okay. I assume all the bad people have left. Now it's the good people left. Okay. I forgot how much this hurts the throat. Yapping without water for so long. I don't envy our teachers. Okay, so let's go through this in the way that the textbook lays it out. So again, some of this is going to be a recap, verbatim, some of it is going to be expanded. We'll go a little bit slower though. What is social psychology? Again, it is the study of the way in which people's thoughts, feelings, behaviors are influenced by real or imagined presence of other people. As social psychologists, we're interested in understanding how and why the social environment shapes the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of the individual. Social interpretation is a huge part of that. The power of social interpretation cannot be underestimated. It's very important to understand how people perceive and interpret the social world in order to understand social influence, to the point where it's more important to understand how people view the social world than it is to understand that world objectively from the point of view of other people. Construct refers to the world, including your perception of the world around you, the social interactions you have, whatever it is. Again, constructs are key to social psychology, and social interpretation is key. We don't really have to review the whole comparator between sociology with social psychology and personality psychology and all that stuff. I think it's pretty fundamental as long as you understand each field. As a quick recap, I guess, again, with sociology, the focus is more broad, focused on class effect on the individual, institutions, race, family, religion, all those effects on people as organized social categories, as well as social psychologists seek to understand and identify universal properties of human nature that make everybody susceptible to social influences. So yeah, that's a little throw bone there. Personality psychology, again, it's more about the explained behavior in terms of people's individual traits as opposed to how individuals act within a social context in relation to each other. Um, yeah. Um, yeah, the power of the situation, again, as we talked about, we're very heavily influenced by our social environments, uh, to the point where we tend to explain behavior in terms of individual personality traits and underestimate the power of the situation shaping individuals' behavior, uh, despite the fact that social environment is so crucial. And we're going to get into this a little bit later. It might be next topic. But we actually specifically mention, it's funny that the textbook does it, the fact that simply educating people and putting them through psych classes like this and stats class and everything else can expand their view of thinking of the world to such a degree that the true wholehearted cognizance of these fallacies and these biases that we have can work to better ourselves and our community. Anyway, that's just a small yap. Um, yes, the learning objective to that was to summarize why it matters how people explain and interpret events as well as their own and others' behavior. Uh, yeah, it's really quite simple. It's important to keep in mind that how people behave in a given situation is not determined by the objective conditions of a situation, but rather by how they perceive it, which is construals. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, as far as how people explain and interpret events, at least events from our perspective that are engaged with other people, solely focusing on the dispositional can lead to biases and can sometimes, not necessarily in a bad way, because there's both sides to the fundamental attribution error, but can rid you of what could potentially be good relationships, proper circumstances, whatever it may be. Yeah, the situation is powerful. Um, yeah. Um, uh, a light review of our constructs here again. Construals uh, our our perceptions, our comprehensions, our interpretation of the world around us, and that is largely shaped by two different motives, right? The need to be accurate and the need to feel good about ourselves, and a facilitation of our ego. But the thing is, these things tug in opposite directions sometimes. For example, when an accurate view of how we act in a situation could reveal that we behaved selfishly, there will be a tugging between between these two things. And we have a strong need to maintain our self-esteem, so we will distort our perception of the world around us to be able to preserve that, unfortunately, at the expense of accuracy. Um, yeah, we we try to gain accurate understandings of the world around us so that we can take effective action and make good judgment. But in reality, individuals typically act on the basis of incomplete and inaccurately interpreted information. And part of that is because we kind of, in this push and pull dynamic between our two motives of needing to be accurate and needing to maintain our ego and feel good about ourselves, we kind of end up pulling and tugging in different directions. Um, yeah. Uh, why is the study of social psychology important? That was another learning objective. Naturally, we have these theories about human behavior. Um, they are applied effectively to deal with a range of contemporary problems that include prejudice, energy shortages, the spread of HIV, whatever it is, and social psychology and the way that it interprets our relationship with the world around us can heavily impact that. We have an expansion here just upon all of those different learning objectives. Uh, I'll go through really quickly and find what exactly is crucial. Okay, this could be a good keyword. Naive realism. This is something to take away. Uh, okay, yeah. So instead of focusing on the reality of our social environments, social psychologists are more concerned with how we perceive those same social environments and how those interpretations or constructs or constructs of our situation affect us. So again, that is the personal construct, right? How our environment, our interpretation of that, our subjective experience with that environment, are constructed in our subjective lens and how that can reflect on us. Um, Naive realism is a piece of personal constructs. It is a component to personal constructs. And what naive realism is, it's a construct that we all generally share. It is the conviction all of us have to perceive things, to believe that we perceive things as they really are or accurately. As such, we assume that other reasonable people should see things the same way that we do. So it's essentially, we all have at least some inclination into believing that we are right. That's called naive realism, and that is part of our personal constructs. Um, what else could be crucial here that you guys could benefit from my extensive, painstaking textbook notes? Yeah, when it comes to the fundamental attribution error, we'll talk about that some more. We already mentioned this in class, but unfortunately, and I think I might have mentioned it earlier, the unfortunate reality of the fundamental attribution error is that even if you become more aware of it, we all generally have a tendency, regardless, to lay responsibility upon the individual for their misfortune, uh, as opposed to the situation, or even our misfortune. We talk about this a little bit later, but it's the yeah, we really like to prioritize ourselves when it comes to, for example, our successes, and try to move as far away from that accountability when it comes to our failures. If we fail, we like to blame that on the situation. If we succeed, we like to take that credit, uh, as beautifully as that is. Uh, yeah. Um, Again, unfortunately, in many cases, even when people are made aware of situational factors, individuals still always showcase a tendency to lay responsibility internally. And earlier, I talked about the fact that you can take psych classes and you'll become more aware of these things, and that's definitely true. And even today, actually, in class, we talked about the fact that when it comes to the fundamental attribution error, different cultures will make the error more or less frequently, and empathy definitely plays a role. And the reality is, most people, when you make them aware of the situational factors, they will change their minds. Your average reasonable person, but first instinct is usually to go right for the dispositional factor. Um, we talked about the community game, so we don't need to go back over that. Oh, this was interesting. So we'll go over a little bit of Gestalt psychology, uh, and the idea of a social situation. So we try to define what a social situation is. Again, social psychology and social situations are intertwined so much. We're looking at the social situation's effect on the individual, right? Um, Different camps of thinkers have different ways of defining that. So, for example, the behaviorism camp, behaviorism is the school of psychology maintaining that to understand human behavior, you only need to look to the reinforcing properties of the environment, uh, such as dogs being conditioned by humans through positive reinforcement to come for food, for example. That's behaviorism, right? Um, Human behavior is understood by looking at the reinforcing properties of the environment. Uh, they look to describe the properties of the situation, um, as essentially like how rewarding it is, and then to document the behavior from those properties. Uh, very, very limited understanding. That is the issue of it. Again, we have here written, unfortunately, while reward and punishment, the behaviorist view on social situations, uh, is obviously an influencer for behavior. Its scope is far too limiting. Instead, we want to look at the situation from the viewpoint of people in it to see how they construe the world around them, as opposed to kind of looking at the environment and then centering it in. So again, the key concept there is that the individual and their subjective experience is God in this, right? Gestalt psychology. Gestalt psychology has a part to play in social psychology here. Social psychology has some of its roots in Gestalt psychology. In the psychological approach, Gestalt psychology is the psychological approach that provides us with a basis for so much construct emphasis. Gestalt psychology stresses the importance of studying the subjective ways in which an objective or a visualization in its entirety appears to someone's mind as opposed to the objective physical attributes of the thing. So, in layman's terms, it's kind of like all those like optical illusions that you'd look at where it's like, I think we looked at one in 201 where it's like a horse on its side, but it's actually a frog. But you kind of look at these things in their parts and you make a whole. That's saying the whole is different or greater than the sum of its parts. That is part of Gestalt psychology. Um, yeah, the whole is different or greater than the sum of its parts, and the subjective experience of the perceiver and how a thing can present itself as a whole to the human brain takes priority. That is key to how Gestalt psychology relates to social psychology. So again, the subjective experience of the perceiver, or the whole, and how that thing can present itself as a whole to the human brain takes priority. Kurt Wynn, who is a young German Jewish professor, also helped shape social psychology. He took the bold step of applying Gestalt psychology principles, and he did that far beyond the perception of objects, which is what Gestalt was focusing on, and applied them to social perception, right? How people perceive other people and their motives, and intents, and behaviors. This application of Kurt using Gestalt psychology on the mind as opposed to objects and illusions provide a perspective of people in any situation to see how they may construe a social environment, and we've used that to this day. Yeah. Let's take a sip of water here. Yeah, just to kind of expand on that a little bit, I have this little tidbit here called to construe or not to construe, or to construe or to misconstrue. We talked about this just a little bit through kind of our lens of Kurt Wynn and Gestalt psychology. But essentially, like let's say you're kissed on the cheek by a coworker, to misconstrue that situation would be like a major blunder. Like it could result in other consequences, workplace environment, catastrophe, whatever it is. But following the principles of Gestalt psychology and the Wynn's evolving of it, it would be in our best interest to examine how we, or in this case if we're the researcher, examining how somebody reacted to the kiss as a whole and the person's interpretation of it as opposed to dissecting the objective nature of the kiss. So again, you want to, the idea broadly is just focus on the whole, not just the parts. Yeah, we talk a lot about construals here. Again, construals are motivated by the need to be accurate and the need to feel good about ourselves. The reason people view the world the way they do can often be traced back to this underlying need to maintain a favorable image. Um, What else could help you guys here? Yeah. This is actually important. So, yeah. When these two pull in opposite directions, there are two things that we can do. We can either bend reality and move towards the need to feel good, or we can face up to the fact that we have acted wrong. And to do that, we need to perceive the world accurately. Again, given the choice, people will usually choose to preserve themselves as opposed to accuracy because it's very difficult to own up to major deficiencies in oneself. Unfortunately, this personal distortion will usually result in us being uh, unable to learn from our mistakes. Um, but as researchers, this moment of oppositional pull, at least according to Leon Festinger, is when we can gain our most valuable insights into the workings of the human heart and the human mind. And we're going to explore this a little bit. The implication is not that individuals will totally distort reality if these two things are pulling in opposite directions and they don't take accountability. They don't deny all negative information, but they'll kind of spin it to some degree to paint themselves in better light, reinforce pros despite being outweighed by the cons, whatever it may be. Um, uh, yeah, that kind of moves into the whole frat thing. Hazing, where we'll justify certain experiences, certain past behaviors, uh, in order to kind of protect our sense of self. Yeah. Um, Anywho, what else can you guys learn from? What can we take away? Oh yeah, this is funny. It's not too important. If you want to click off the video now, you can. But I'll just read this last paragraph. So I was reading this section of the textbook, and I read it, and I immediately called my buddies because I thought that it was incredibly funny. So I'll just read the box. Ultimately, and this is part of the learning objective, explain why the study of social psychology is important. So, ultimately, the ability to understand and explain complex and dysfunctional social behavior brings with it the challenge to change it. For example, despite how effective fear can be in garnering results, for example, putting graphic images of people with cancer and dying on cigarette boxes, social psychologists have realized that this approach can be ineffective sometimes. Uh, so, for example, in the same case of a similar strategy being used on condom boxes in an effort to promote safer sex, which was done so by putting pictures of STD effects on the boxes, um, due to the fact that there were sexual effects of thinking about fear and potential health risk when handling the condom boxes during sex. So, think of a guy who's about to engage in sexual intercourse and he picks up the box and he's hooking up with someone that he just met, and the first thing he sees on the box is a picture of somebody with chlamydia, and it's someone's genitalia. Uh, that the sexual effect of that might not be ideal. So that, in addition to several statistics already showing that using condoms can at least partially reduce enjoyment of sexual acts, both due to its interruptions to stimulation as well as the fact that you need to stop engaging in the sexual act to go get a condom. All these things together, again, the sexual effects of this morbid image, the fact that condoms can interrupt both in feeling and in going to get them. Most people just turned away from using condoms, period. So, unlike cigarettes, this completely backfired. Alternatively, they'll have the sex anyways without a condom, but they'll engage in denial about the person, right? This need to maintain a positive sense of self. They'll say, whatever's happening on the box, this can't happen to me. Like, my partner's not going to have AIDS, whatever. Uh, It would follow that if people can succeed in convincing themselves that nothing bad would happen to them, all while engaging in unprotected sex due to condoms acting as an interruption on several different levels, then the fear strategy would have the opposite effect. People would just continue having unprotected sex. However, and this is why we need social psychologists, by understanding self-esteem maintenance, as we'll discuss, social psychologists have been able to contribute insights into sexual education in a way where they've been able to promote healthier sexual activity, sexual health awareness, things like that, without detracting from the use of condoms, period. I thought that was very funny. Anywho, that is our both textbook chapter and lecture notes summary of chapter 1. Tomorrow I will be doing some more of these for the rest of the chapters. Hope you enjoyed.